What's up, everybody? It's your boy Showtimedr. So the topic of this video is going to be characters I think that need some tweaks. For the purposes of this video, I'm not going into too many of the MLs, even though there are a couple, or any of the characters that had awakenings, because those were at least attempts to make them more useful. So otherwise, let's get into it here. Now, our first one is going to be Big Ludwig. So you might be thinking, well, what's the problem with Ludwig? He hits hard, blah, blah, blah. Well, the problem I have with him is his 3 is too dependent on being invincible. If you read it, hits all enemies, penetrates defense 20%, when invincible 50%, and a critical hit gives him barrier, which, to be honest, I think that last part, it's just kind of whatever. Proportional to caster's attack, right? So you kind of have to run him with barrier, which means, or excuse me, with invincible. So he can give it to himself, but how realistic is that, right, in PvP? So you can run him with someone like a Hades or Elena or someone else that can hand out invincibility. And you're kind of going to have to fine-tweak your team as far as who goes when, what have you. But the problem with him is, basically, if you put a Dispel on him or a buff block, debuff, unable to be buffed, then he's pretty much not as useful as he can be. So I'm thinking that they should probably just get rid of the whole invincible thing altogether. They could keep on his 2 if they want, that's fine. But I think the thing that needs to change is you could buff his total penetration depending on how many buffs he has. So get rid of invincible and give him, say, 5% for every buff that he has on. It'll be kind of similar to Kayron, how he strengthens the more buffs he has. Or actually, I think it's just if he has any buff, to be honest. And then that way you could even increase his 1. It could start off with no penetration, and then say he has 2 buffs, 10% penetration. And that's something that you would have to naturally upgrade as well with Mulligor isn't fully invested in. That would be what I would do with him. Now, that still means that he's still capable of being beaten with Dispels or, you know, debuffs and what have you. But I just think he's too dependent on one particular buff. So I don't think, because there's only a certain amount of characters that can do that, and most of them are fairly high tier. Elena's 5-star, Hades is 5-star. Or does she start off as 4-star? She might start off as 4. But then, C. Armin, ML 5 stars, so she's a little bit too dependent on other things to happen, so that's what I would do with her. So next up, we're going to go into Big Zeno here. So what's the issue with Zeno, you say? Well, he's an ice mage, so he's already competing with Dizzy for that spot, along with Ludwig, who are both very useful characters, right? So his 3 is an AoE, 65% chance to silence, and inflicts bleeding. Damage is proportional to his max health. For one thing, bleeding in general is not very useful, especially if you're going to have someone whose damage is proportional to max health, but bleeding goes off of... Bleeding's damage ticks go off your attack. So that's kind of contradictory there. The silence itself and the AoE effect, in my opinion, are fine, as are the soul burn for the extra turn. The thing I have a main issue with is his 2. Enemy uses a non-attack skill, increase defense of the caster and damage dealt by Ancient Beast by 7%. And increase effectiveness by 5%, can stack up to 8 times. So when you're done upgrading that, that's 10% per stack. But the problem is, how many times have you been in that situation where someone's using a non-attack skill that many times in, say, 4 to 5 rounds, let's say? So essentially that's going to be next to useless in PvP, because, yeah, there might be 1 or 2 non-attack skills, but usually it's just Slaughterfest, and you got to be ready to go now with your damage. PvE, hey, I'm sure there's situations where in, like, Abyss or something, someone uses a non-attack skill. But, you know, if you gotta wait that long for your character to be at their peak efficiency, like someone like Lorena, she's done after 5 turns, right? She self-buffs herself and she's done. And you can usually get that off by the time you've gone through, say, the first mob, as far as the Abyss stages go. And then when you get to the true boss, there it is. So otherwise, I got no issues with him for the most part. I just think he ramps up too slow, and especially with his competition at that slot, he's gonna need something for himself at some point here. So, alright, let's get into the next character, Aether. So it's funny, when Epic 7 first released their promotional video for PvP, Aether was like prominently featured as, you do this with Aether and then your team gets more mitigation and blah 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 and then you win. Aether has not been a staple of anything, ever. At least as far as I played. I did miss almost a year there. But so look at Aether's 3. Recovers health, 3-turn cooldown, and casts a barrier. So in today's meta, barriers are still mostly useful, although for some characters, such as the new ML, barriers are actually a hindrance that end up getting you fully armor broken. And so, if we look at Aether's 2 here, recovers an ally's health, so single target, and dispels 2 buffs before increasing caster's combat readiness by 20%. Amount recovered is target's max health and caster's attack. So they're wanting us to run Aether as this kind of weird attack. The harder you hit, the more you heal type thing. Which, in my opinion, if you're gonna do that, the 1 should be a heal. This should be an AoE that, yeah, it can heal, but it also needs to inflict some type of abnormality, because that as it is by itself, despite the cooldown, not going to be good enough in today's PvP. And granted, this was one of the first launch characters, so, you know, you need some time to adjust. But I think Aether deserves an awakening. And that's my opinion on that. Now, 3 and 2 do heal on fairly low cooldowns, but as you can see, who uses Aether for anything right now? When's the last time you've seen Aether in PvP? Just saying. So, if you're gonna have an Ice Soul Weaver, there's lots of competition there, starting with Miss DN here. But anyways, let's move on. So, Bossk. For those who weren't around, Bossk was a character in the past, basically, and was actually one of the first characters that did AoE immunity. You can see here, 3 turns. A 3-turn AoE immunity, that sounds pretty powerful, right? Also gives himself a barrier. But that's pretty much it. And then 2, chance to dispel all buffs from an enemy on a 4-turn cooldown. This starts with a 6-turn cooldown and can be taken to a 5-turn cooldown, so with the buff duration, it kind of makes sense, but with today's mechanics of Dispel, and especially since this is a knight with no taunt, you know, buffing yourself really doesn't matter, because boss just kind of exists, not going to do any good damage, especially when you're competing in the Ice Knight slot, which is a highly contested slot there. So, just needs something. I would put a taunt on his 1. And then I would consider maybe buffing this with something else besides barrier for himself. Maybe give another AoE effect that's not as popular. So let's say speed or increased effectiveness or something to that effect. That's what I'm thinking, because you never see this character. Granted, it was a limited character, but it was a free character. So if the character was effective, you would see a bunch of the long-time people using it. So now we get to my man Elson here. Oh boy, Elson. When the game first started, Elson was one of the most desired units to build off of the table in the lobby, because just had really powerful skills, and especially if you were lacking a Soul Weaver, everyone was using Elson over pretty much anything that wasn't either Destina, Angelica, or Acades. And the issue with Elson, they nerfed Elson when they went through just nerfing a bunch of the heroes. And so this used to be, if I remember right, it was a 3-turn cooldown once you factored in the skill enhance. So you had a 2-turn buff, increased attack and defense for everybody on a 3-turn cooldown, and you also got a pretty fat heal out of that, depending on your target's max health there. And you could soul burn and cover it the full 3 turns if you wanted to. So they decided that was a little bit too much, and I'll give them that, but I think that this should be, in general, Elson just got hit too hard, in my opinion, just got hit too hard. Now this skill, his 2, attacks with a meteor shower, recovers health of all allies. It wasn't that strong in AoE, and it was something to fill in the healing void, because while this was going on, that's down for a long time, and then this is the filler, basically, and then you would just supplement it with 1, which the 1's not really that remarkable, decreasing attack. But I just feel like this should come down a turn, in my opinion. And the buff should still be the 2 and the 3, so 2-turn buff with the option to consume 10 souls. Oh, you could make it even 20 souls if you want. But I still think that option should be there for that to be a full coverage. So that's just my opinion, especially for a light hero, because we just didn't have that many light supports for the longest time. But let me know what you guys think about that one. Let's keep going here. So Crozet is another one. I actually have a Crozet, and I actually built Crozet early in my career, which I now consider a mistake. It was for Wyvern. It was long before Momo had her awakening. I just run Momo to tank it now. And I didn't have anything else like an Angelica or a Tywin or anything that would have been really good. But my main issue with him is, you see this ulti, it's a 5-turn cooldown. Decreased combat readiness, which is fine. Decent chance to provoke, but the provoke's only 1 turn. I think that instead of that soul burn effect being increased damage deal, because he's not really there for his damage, you know, give us a 2-turn taunt for that. If it's going to be a 5-turn, upgrade it to a 4-turn cooldown. That's my opinion. Yeah, you guys can mess with that. I really like his 2, actually. His 2's actually saved me a fair amount of times. Puts a barrier and increased defense on anyone that goes below 50%. Single target once a turn. I think that's actually really strong. And then another unremarkable one, a decreased attack, where either that could be a taunt, and they could leave his 3 alone, or they need to, like, make this grant barrier or something like that, the way FCC's does. It's just something that's going to actually help out the team as a knight, because decreased attack, there's characters in spades that can cover that role now. You don't need your knight doing that. So. Alright, let's keep going here. So Corvus. Most of us know DC Dark Corvus, and very, very well put together hero overall. Regular Corvus, he tries to accomplish this thing where... Okay, so he has an Infuriation buff, Fury, that can't be dispelled, so that's great. Defense and effect resist increases by 30. But the problem is, okay, where's his taunt? He doesn't have a taunt, and he's a warrior. Well, Dark Corvus has taunts, right? So what's the problem with regular Corvus having one? He also works on the fighting spirit thing, so same thing as Seaside Bologna and characters like that. So he gets his full fighting spirit. Well, basically it does the whole Fury buff there, right? So his 2, when you look at it, and think about this in PvP especially, but even in PvE, attacks all enemies, decrease combat readiness 20%. If an enemy's combat readiness goes to 0, it stuns them for a turn. When the caster's infuriated, it doubles the amount, so a 40% combat readiness debuff. Now, at the beginning of PvP, when it matters, even if you build your Corvus super fast, you know, that's going to be something where you're going to have to time it when everyone else went, because everyone else is going to be at least 60% most of the time if they have speed sets, combat readiness, so, and you're not going to have Fury right off, so the timing on that, and in PvE, is going to be very crucial, and really not attainable, consistently in any way. Unless maybe you figured something out on Golem or something like that. But once again, you're not stunning Golem. And decreasing his combat readiness, good luck with that. You know, building the effectiveness for that. So, and then once again, his one, it's a little bit more inspired. He takes a debuff and he puts it back on the enemy. And if he's infuriated, he's stunning. So, but since everything's proportional to his defense, the whole thing with him, it just doesn't make sense to me as far as the way his kit is built. I would like to see him either throw a taunt on him, or have some type of different effect for his one, because you have two different stun effects here. That's all I'm saying. I think he could be more useful. And we'll continue on here. So, a character that's near and dear to my heart, Miss Tiaria. Now, they have given us Free Spirit Tiaria, and that was a real good move on their part, not criticizing that at all. Back in the day, Tiara used to be really good, a cheap alternative to if you didn't have a Shuri or a Terran or Guard, right? And so basically you'd invest in her, and she would give you increased combat readiness every time an attack hits, right? So this used to pretty much be doubled, and they nerfed her into the ground and her usefulness went down to nothing. And so you're probably saying, well, combat readiness was really strong early game. Well, yeah, they nerfed everybody's combat readiness buff basically 50%. So if it was 30%, it went down to 15%, etc. But I still don't find her all that out of balance or needed to be nerfed that bad to where this has a 5-turn cooldown. Look at what it does. It's just damage proportional to max health. There's no debuff, there's no buff. You can get an extra turn if you're willing to consume 20 souls, which in most cases you're going to have way more better things to do with your souls. A 5-turn cooldown for that? Like, no, that deserves a buff, my opinion. And her one, decreased hit chance, not the worst thing, 75% when it's fully upgraded. But think about all the molas and stuff you have to invest in her. And before you tell me, well, she's a 3-star hero Showtime so she shouldn't be that effective. Well, Terran Guard does 25% whenever there's a follow-up, which you can easily get follow-up in today's meta. And Shuri does 25% as well when he's fully invested in. So, and that's every time he attacks. So I don't see why Tiara got nerfed that badly. I think she should make a comeback as well. My opinion. Still, I'm sorry, I should stop saying that. Okay, now we get to Rima. Now, Rima, keep in mind, an Ice Ranger. Look at how weird this skill set is. Ulti, 5-turn cooldown. Encourage an ally except for herself. Decreasing skill cooldowns by 3. Well, okay. You know, kind of an interesting thing. And then her one. Single target, a critical hit will decrease the caster's skill cooldown by 1. What? So you're wanting me to make basically 100% critical hit fast character in order to be able to decrease other characters' skill cooldowns from the ranger slot? The ranger slot? Huh? And then, if you're wondering about her too, basically has what becomes an 100% effect chance to put someone to sleep for a turn. And you could soul burn 20, grant an extra turn. The cycling on this character is just a little bit too weird in my opinion. We have characters that do cooldown reduction. But if you're going to keep her with the same style kit, I would actually like to see... This should do maybe decreased skill cooldowns and something else. Maybe a little buff, a combat readiness, something. And then the sleep, in my opinion, is perfectly fine. And this should probably do like maybe combat readiness pushback or something if you're going to make her like, kind of like a control hero. But otherwise, it's just cycle. It's like, you're a ranger, you're supposed to be doing some damage there. Like, everyone that's in that ranger slot, Seaside Bologna, regular Bologna. You know, just anyone you could name. Assyria, like they're all meant to do damage, and this is just kind of a very weird kit, and it's asking you to invest a whole lot for what her kit actually entails there. So, kind of weird, kind of strange, but that's how it goes. So Silk was a character that was very popular early game because she was one of the few characters that could increase speed and decrease speed. I believe Yuna was one of the other ones, but Yuna took a fair bit of grind to get at the time. And it seems like she's really cool, right? So you can get this on a 4-turn cooldown, decrease the enemy speed, increase your team speed. Her 2 is that weird focus thing to where basically they get extra damage from their 1 when they do their 1 enough, which, okay, you know, maybe with, you know, percentage damage, artifacts, or something like that, but her 1 decreases the combat readiness of the opposing team, or excuse me, the single target, and the damage is proportional to her speed. So overall, not a bad hero, but I'm actually thinking I could see a kit to where you do either an awakening or maybe some type of alternative gear or whatever, where instead of this concentration, she should get a stacking buff the way that, I forget the name of the artifact, but you know the artifact where it's for warriors. The more turns someone else takes, the higher that their crit chance and I believe their attack stacks. It should work the opposite for Silk, so that every time her or her team takes a turn, she gets a stacking buff, let's say 2% to damage or crit or what have you. And every time the enemy takes a turn, that decreases 2%. So basically, you're getting a dividend from her ulti because you're taking more turns, they're taking less turns. The longer a fight goes on, the stronger Silk gets. And that could have a maximum stack of, say, 50% or what have you, but it would have to be something to where Silk would be really valuable in long fights. That's what I could see with her, but I don't know, I think that's actually a good suggestion, but... And of course, let me know what you guys think, because I don't have complete experience with every hero in this game. So there's always going to be something here or there I'm going to have missed, but... or better suggestions. It's more discussion is all I'm saying. So Mercedes. Now, she does have an ML. But this is a 4-star unit, and she's very much like how Ross used to be at the beginning of the game, if you guys remember, before his awakening. Her ulti is just straight up damage, no effect, no buff, nothing. And proportional to enemies lost health, that's one thing. 3-turn cooldown, which is actually really good, considering it's a AoE ulti, right? But still unremarkable otherwise. Now this is also 3 turns, Dimensional Rupture. But once again, nothing to it except for damage. And even the soul burn effect increased damage. So I'd like to see her get some type of extra buffs or debuffs or something that she's doing, whether it's combat readiness. There's something to that effect. It'd be kind of cool if she had kind of like a more evil side, since she's a homunculus, right? So she was created basically to be evil, even though she rebuffed that through all the story and stuff we went through with her, right? So maybe sometimes it could have one effect or a different effect, and what have you. And then her 1, once again, no effect to it. Does attack 2 enemies, which is nice, but... And if you look at all her upgrades, increased damage dealt, with the exception of the turn cooldown on her 3, so... Would like to see this character get a different feel, and Awakening I think is in order for her, to make her more useful, similar to the way Raz's style is, and that will be wholly dependent on the game coming up with a story for her, because very much right now she's just, I simp for Raz in the story, right? So I'd like to see her get a little more character development, and you can make a kit that, you know, we could all be proud of with Murmur. And next up, Miss Otelli. So the only issue I really have with her, I actually think her character design is really freaking cool. I like the little halo thing behind her. Really cool, right, for an ML hero? 3-star dark. But her ultimate skill is single target. Really strong. Decreased combat readiness, silencing, and unable to be buffed. You know, very similar to Fairy Tail, except Fairy Tails is something that she can do in AoE. Skill cooldown reduces by 2 turns on 10 souls, which is actually very cheap for that, considering you can make this a 3-turn cooldown and you can increase the combat readiness to 40%. But I think this should be AoE, and I think that it should be attached to the Soul Burn, which the Soul Burn's already really powerful, so I know that's going to kind of like put people off when I say that, but hear me out. Harado, basically, he's a 3-star ML as well. He has an AoE that basically does similar effects. I believe it's a Dispel along with the Silence, but it's a Dispel along with some type of debuff. Might be unable to be buffed. And that's a 3-star unit. So why not give this character the option to have a similar thing? And if you look at the rest of her skills, decreased damage from AoEs up to 30%, that would be huge in today's meta, and almost no one takes advantage of that, you know? And then, unhealable for 2 turns on a single target, which I think is fair, 50% once you upgrade it. And I think if they just made that slight tweak to her, you would actually see her in PvP a little bit more. And considering you could awaken her and get the additional effect pretty easily, which is defense, or effectiveness if you want to go improved, I think that would actually make her a very awesome unit. And you see the amount of detail the artist put into her, it's a shame. Just we don't get to see her at all. And we basically don't even know, as far as I've seen in the story, who is she? What does she do? What does she want? What are her goals? What are her dreams? What frustrates her? It's just no one knows. So now we're getting to Haste, and the Haste that's in the game now, Blood Moon Haste, his ML version, is super powerful, super strong, one of the meta-bending characters right now, which I'm actually going to get into when we get the Maid Chloe later. But so what's the issue with Haste then? Well, his 3, first of all, it's a 5-turn cooldown, which is really freaking long. 60% chance to inflict 3 bleeding effects, AoE, for 2 turns. When there are 3 or fewer enemies, damage dealt increases with fewer enemies, which that last part is fine. Bleed in today's meta, for the most part, is just not there. If people want to go with dots, they go with Burn, because Burn ticks harder than Bleed for the amount of attack that you put in. Haste also has a 2 that it gives him Vampiric Touch, which is a unique debuff that pretty much he's the only one that can do it. And so makes him unhealable and inflicts the debuff, which every time someone attacks, it increases their health on your team. And then also does a little AoE heal there. The issue with this actually makes him really good for Golem, but that's pretty much it. It's such a situational debuff otherwise, especially in a game where they are actually actively punishing you when it comes to Abyss and a lot of the other modes in the game for putting debuffs on characters. So when you're going to put, say, you have a limit of 3 debuffs on somebody, well, you know that's going to be defense down. And then depending on what else is going on, if they're hitting you really hard, you want attack down or hit decrease. If you can get speed decrease on them to take less turns, yay. But there's a lot of characters with kits to where competing debuffs, you're not going to want to put Vampiric Touch on those people. And not to mention all the bleeds and stuff, pretty much making him unusable in those cases. For the most part. He's still pretty decent on Golem, or if you have a team that's all bleeds, so you're investing in... God, I'm even trying to remember all the bleed heroes right now. I forget her name, the other fire lady that can put 4 bleeds up and detonate. Which is another thing, detonate is actually something that should probably be in his kit as well, so that you can choose to get rid of certain debuffs. And what would be really cool is if there was an ability to where you know a debuff is going to expire, so you can choose to attack that person with haste, and if there is a debuff on him, it consumes the first available debuff. and does an additional damage multiplier or what have you. And then that way you could run them a little bit more strategically, especially with those areas to where, you know, oh no, this debuff got up, I don't want it on. Okay, I'm going to use Haste 1 or his 2. It should probably be his 2. I'm going to detonate that first debuff. It's going to do AoE damage or consume damage to whatever you hit. And that's the type of thing I think Haste should do, because he's just so bleed dependent. And that just unfortunately makes him unusable, not only for PvP, but pretty much in all PvE as well. Not all of it, but I don't see any issues with that one. Alright, so Leo, you will see Leo sometimes, actually. It's kind of like a meme build, but nothing serious for the most part. The problem I have with Leo is he just is too dependent on stun. So what do I mean by that? His 3 is an AoE, decreases speed, and has a good chance to stun, right? Okay, you can take on a 4-turn cooldown. His 2 has a chance to proc his 1, and he puts decreased defense up. Pretty good, right? But then his 1 is once again stun chance. And his 2 has a chance to do his 1. So, well, we all know from playing the game, you're really not going to get a lot of stuns out on anything that matters. You know, PvP, it's arguable if you give him enough effectiveness and he was fast enough. Okay. But PvE, you know, you're not doing this to Banshee. You're not doing this to maybe some of Banshee's ads. But you're not doing this to anything that's worth it. Worth a dang, you know? And there's already... We're at the point in the game right now where doing damage is generally more important than stunning something. If I want to stun something, I'll go and get a Domino here. And freaking, she has something that can basically turn into a 90% chance to AoE stun on a 4-turn cooldown, decreases combat radiance. I'm just gonna run her. Like, I've seen her in PvP, and she can be really freaking fed in PvP. So that's just my my thing for her here. Now we'll get over here to Kawasu. The only issue I have with him, for the most part, this should be AoE. It's just in the nature of fire. Fire is not a single target thing. It's all-consuming. It spreads. It grows. It consumes. So this should be AoE. If you got to make it like a soul burn or something, okay, fine. But in my opinion, this should be AoE. So unhealable, decreased defense for 2 turns. 3-turn cooldown. And then otherwise, his 2 is amazing. Basically, if he's debuffed, it's going to dispel it once every 3 turns and increase his attack. So you could get off what you want to get off. And then his 2 is a burn, which once again, burn. You can take it to 100% chance if you want. Burn ticks really hard, as we found out with a lot of the meta heroes. But I just think, even if you got to extend this like an extra turn, I think that this should be AoE. If you're going to tell me he's a 4-star character, and I could see 3-star characters that have AoEs that are really strong. So that's what I think. Now, his little sister, really the only weird thing about her is a lot of it is she does have AoE on her ulti, 5-turn cooldown, down to 4, but then it stuns and it dispels debuffs, but only if... or her damage gets improved if everyone's a fire hero. So essentially they're telling you to run her on Golem, right? But she could increase all fire healers a nullifier, which you can technically just run like Hazel to get the improved attack, and then FCC, and not have to worry about everyone being a fire hero. But then we get back to bleeds here, and if the enemy is debuffed, it's additional damage. It's just, her kit's just a little bit too dependent on everyone being a fire unit, in my opinion. So, if you want to run on Golem, hey, I'm sure she's really good for that, but it's a 4-star unit. She should see more usability outside of everyone being a fire unit, because that's not feasible in PvP. You can't run 4 fire heroes and then expect to dominate. just not gonna be a thing. So, alright, so we'll keep going here. Nemunus. So this poor character doesn't see too much play unless you see her in the story. Her ulti, 4-turn cooldown, dispels 1 debuff and increases attack. Not terrible, but... okay, and then her 2, decrease hit chance for 2 turns, and combat readiness by 30%, proportional to enemies' max health. Well, we all know, besides getting into the fact of the whole competing debuff slots, proportional to enemies' max health can be really good. In general, you're not going to be able to decrease most things' combat readiness, anything that's worth a damn at least. It can be useful though. And then this is a decreased combat readiness after attacking. So a lot of her kit revolves around combat, decreasing combat readiness, which Silk kind of covers that role. Wanderer Silk also covers that role. And there were a couple other characters that do that. So I just think if they're going to make this character useful, they need to get her away. One of these needs to not be combat readiness and needs to do something else. It's pretty much that simple. What that's going to be, I mean, Fire Heroes, there's always competition for that, but it could be a debuff, it could be increasing her own combat readiness, but there just needs to be something else, because if you can't decrease someone's combat readiness, even if it's a grass hero, why are you going to bring this unit, you know? So, that's my piece on her. Now we got one more character. It's going to be the only Moonlight I'm going to cover. Can you guess who? I mentioned her earlier. Da-da! Maid. So a lot of you guys are probably saying, well, Maid's really good. What are you talking about? Yeah, she is really good. But the problem is, because Smilegate had to put so many counters into Arbiter Vildred, Maid Chloe has been unintentionally nerfed because of the addition of characters like Blood Moon Haste. I believe Sinful Angelica is one with Extinction. Extinction destroyed Maid Chloe. Her usefulness in real-time arena, her usefulness in regular arena. Still useful in PvE, but, you know, if you have a character that, you know, as long as they're alive, they inflict Extinction, or as long as Immortality's up, or if this skill hits, what have you, well then Revive's pretty much useless. It's like, she's not going to be able to do anything in PvP, and that was where she was majority used. So I just think that they should have some type of, and it's hard because you get into Extinction versus Revive, and that's kind of a sore topic with Arbiter Vildred, which I understand. But there needs to be something in her kit. Maybe a time buff type thing, to where if she does VIP treatment and it lasts all 3 turns without going off, then for that next turn, the character is immune to Extinction, or something similar to that. Granted, you don't want to make that too powerful, because she would get, like, smoking powerful at that point. But there just needs to be something, because she's unfairly gotten nerfed through no fault of her own, because it wasn't her that was the problem. It was Smilegate not putting enough counters to Arbiter Vildred in the game before they finally started to in Season 2. So that's my opinion on that. Otherwise, I think she's a fine hero, but it's just a shame. Because you pull her now, and then she just doesn't have the same use that she used to have in PvP. But anyways, guys, those are my heroes. I'd love to hear your heroes, who you think should be more useful, should see some more use. And keep in mind, guys, not everybody has to be useful in all content. Okay, some heroes are just there for PvP. Some heroes are really useful in PvE. So like Tamarin, super useful in PvE. PvP doesn't really fire off fast enough unless you got a cooldown reduction for her. And if you're going to use that slot for cooldown reduction, well, that's the price you choose to pay. You know, putting someone like Assyria there. And you have to still have on your team, you know, other roles to cover. So that's my piece on that, guys. Real quick at the end, I wanted to let you guys know I submitted my sponsored video for approval. So as soon as that's up, I'll get that to you. I'm also thinking about doing I wouldn't do many videos on the game, but for anyone that plays Swordmaster Story, I do believe that game needs a little bit of love as far as, you know, teaching people how to play it and what to do, because there's a lot of stuff in that game that really doesn't make sense until you've made a bunch of mistakes. So, be expecting to see something on that. As for stuff I'm looking to do for Epic 7, I got tipped off that on the Korean Smilegate page, they actually have a fair amount more dev notes than we get here on Global. And so I started to read through some of them, and I believe it was around November, it might have been a little earlier. And also on the live stream, by the way, they were basically hinting that there's going to be changes to gear upgrades. It was very vague how they said it, so I don't know if that means they're gonna improve max min rolling, so when you get a piece of gear, it might have, say, 4% of something, it might have 2% of something, and that's already RNG on top of your rolls for it every 3 upgrades, 3 level upgrades. There's a maximum roll and a min roll, so you might get 8% of something, you might get 3% of something, and what have you. So I'm just going to explore what the upgrade to that could possibly be. It's slated for, as they put it, the first half of next year, which is very vague again. But I just hope it doesn't fall into one of those things like great achievement in the guild screen or level up familiar and all the stuff that's been coming soon for 2 years now. I just hope they actually have a plan that they're willing to execute and see through. That's all I'm saying. So, otherwise, guys, thanks for making it to the end. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the content. I'm looking to regrow my channel again, so any support I could receive to that end will be greatly appreciated. And yo, peace out.